I'd like you to note how nicely Stan Marcus played right there. We are at the end of the first round, and we'll take a short break in a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to invite one of our judges, the first of them, to come up. Wendy Vardaman, who with her colleague Sarah Bussey is co-poet laureate of Madison. And with Sarah, she edits Verse Wisconsin and Cow Feather Press. Please welcome Wendy Vardaman.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so happy that you invited me to judge, and thanks to Jackie for all the arrangements that she's made for today. This is a Madison poem, Ode to the Crossing Guard, for Russell, who watches over Edgewood and Monroe, who asks my son where his sister has gone to college and how she likes it, who waves as if he wants to hand me a cloud as I pass his corner morning and afternoon, who hands my kids a Mother's Day card and tells them to sign it and give it to me, who is happy to hear Northwestern because I'm from Chicago, who yells, "Slow down," at the cars, even when there aren't kids waiting to cross this busy road that killed another cat last night, who holds back drivers while bicyclists escape another face-to-face with death, who never misses a school day, who teases my son for not wearing a coat in the cold, then shares the joke with a shout across the street at me later, who has pieced us together after years of bringing our neighborhood peace, who arrives early with his collection of orange cones, then sits in the car reading the newspaper until it's time to center them in the intersection, who says, "Hello, hello, hello, hello," each greeting as cheerful as the last, who calls me young lady, who crosses over one afternoon to gift me with a folded clipping pointing at the thumb-sized photo. "Isn't this your smiling face?" Whose name I only just now think to ask.
Well, that is the end of the second round, and we'll take another break in just a moment. But before we do that, I'd like another of our judges to read a poem. Poets know this. Those of us who love poetry sometimes forget it. Poets are real people who do work in the world that is almost as hard as poetry. Oscar Morales is currently principal and executive director of Omega School, an alternative school in Madison, and has assisted over 1,500 young adults prepare for and complete their GED diploma in the past decade. Oscar Morales.
This is harder than it looks. No, I generally don't recite poetry. So I write it, and so I want to applaud all the participants because I know how challenging it is. So I thought I would challenge myself. And so I've been reciting in the car. Not talking on the cell phone or texting, just reciting. So this poem is called "Why Did You Name Me Javier, Dad?" Why did you name me Javier, Dad? My 6-year-old son was asking me after his t-ball game, and we were stopping at Culver's to get a single scoop ice cream cone. Can I change my name when I get older? All 3 of my children had asked me the same question when they were about 5 or 6 years old. My oldest son, Diego, in which my wife let me pick the name, asked, why did you name me Diego Jesus Margil Barbosa Idelis? I told him I had named him after the famous Mexican muralist Diego Rivera, and found out my Diego was born 100 years minus 1 day. And he was named Margil after my grandfather, and named Jesus after my older brother, who I thought would never have children. But he was not impressed. He still thought I should have probably named him Steve or Kurt, or another name that doesn't take up too much space, or no one would notice the first day of school. My second oldest son, Sergio, asked me the same question when I was reading him a go-to-bed book. He said the kids had a hard time saying his name and came up with words like surgery and Sergio Valente, and words we can't say in a family-style poem. He said, "Didn't you know any English names, Dad?" I told him his mother and I purposely picked names that could not be easily changed to English ones, like Carlos to Chuck, Juan to John, Jose to Joe. But with my daughter, Lorena Pilar, thought we were punishing her for picking such a name. I told her it was the most beautiful name I could ever think of. And why would she want to be one of the thousands of Jessicas or Ambers or Tiffany? She still thought I was punishing her or something. Which gets us back to my youngest son, who was originally named Oscar Javier. But after less than 24 hours of hearing little Oscar, little Oscar, little Oscar, we thought that we could not punish him for 20 years of that. So we changed his name to Javier Oscar. And I was about to give my personal cultural pride speech to my 6-year-old. But suddenly I got this inspiration to sit back and listen to what my son had to say. You know, Dad, I want to change my name to Oscar when I get older, so I can be more like you.
Max Garland is frantically trying to decide what poem he's going to recite. And in a moment, the decision will be made.
Still thinking. First memory I have of an experience with poetry in school was reading Edgar Allan Poe, and in inspiration I composed my first poem, the 8th grade. It went something like, a bird flew to my window yesterday, he didn't utter a word. I tried to think of something to say, but what do you say to a bird? So you can see I was bound for good things. The poem went on in that same sing-song manner, and I don't remember, gratefully I don't remember the rest, but I do remember the end. Bird flew to my window yesterday, he pecked me and he flew away. I gave up on rhyme after that, completely. I was a mailman for almost a decade, speaking of real things you do for a living, and when I wrote this poem, I thought it was about being a mailman. After a while, I began to think it's maybe about being a poet. Aria for the U.S. Mail, and that's M-A-I-L, by the way. Some days it's all the hope you get. This postal froth and cataract, letters spilling and tumbling down the conveyor, gull white, thin as flounder. Above the flutter of typography and penmanship, the bright stamp, depicting a wild bird, a suffragette, the inventor of the threshing machine. The stamp like a tiny sail blown jagged by the bleak winds of cancellation. Some days as you stand at the sorter, your pale blue shirt, knee-high socks, the fact that any word reaches anyone seems miracle enough. That memory has a slim but measurable weight. That thought flies above you in the night over the sooted rooftops, bales and bundles of it, higher than breath or weather. That a letter ever lands on her seems enough, that you can hold it, sniff it, steam it open, even clutch it to your breast in some private operatic gesture. And we're not talking the love letters of Keats here or the 15th epistle of Paul. It may be no more, in fact, than a dashed-off note, a utility bill, an invitation to a wedding between two people everyone knows should never have met. But still, who's to say? What with the ground not so solid under you and the world on its flight through practically nothing, there is this tiny message from beyond yourself, for better or worse, in its own shy way, demanding an answer. Thanks.